Hello Ground Control, I'm Paul and welcome to Retrostellar. Like a lot of people my age, I tend to look back fondly on bygone days and complain that things used to be so much better back when I was a kid. Well, if I'm honest, the 20th century world wasn't necessarily all better. We had to use actual paper maps to get directions. A lot of places didn't have air conditioning in the summer. And if you wanted to know a trivial fact, like whether or not Michael McDonald sang backup for Steely Dan, you couldn't just Google it. You had to ask your older brother, who claimed it wasn't him, even though you knew it was. But there's one thing that I liked a lot better back in the day. It was the way we looked at the future. In the past, we had some pretty cool ideas about what one day would look like. When we look back today and examine those predictions past, it's called retrofuturism, and it's a big part of what Retrostellar is all about. There have always been futurists. The Mayans, Nostradamus, and even Ben Franklin loved to think ahead boldly. But for me, the 20th century produced the best kind of retrofuturism, the kind that comes from pop culture. The best of that lot came from a time period that I like to call the analog age. It's a 40-year span from 1959 to 1999, from the first episode of The Twilight Zone to Star Wars Phantom Menace, from NASA's Mercury 7 to the Y2K Panic, from Rock'em Sock'em Robots to the Sega Dreamcast. And with a tip of the cap to Homer Simpson, I've got my time-traveling toaster here to help us look at the peak points of that glorious era. So let's go back in time and visit the analog age. 1961. U.S. President John F. Kennedy challenges the nation to land a man on the moon before the decade is out. The space race against the villainous Soviet Union produced a frenzy of technological innovation that still impacts the way we live. Inventions like MRIs, memory foam, and freeze-dried food had their origin at NASA. By the way, microchips, Tang, and Velcro are often mistakenly credited as NASA creations, but they each predate the space program. 1962. The first James Bond movie, Dr. No, is released, making Sean Connery an international superstar and delivering arguably the most famous line of dialogue in movie history.
Bond. James Bond.
Studios and TV networks started churning out secret agent stories at breakneck speed. Well, if you're asking me what's futuristic about 007, you've clearly forgotten about all the gadgets. 62 also gave us the Jetsons, quite possibly the quintessential example of American retrofuturism. It was the first show broadcast in color on ABC, and full-spectrum depictions of suburban life in Orbit City would include a clairvoyant vision of the 21st century. Yes, we're still waiting to drive our own flying cars, but the Jetsons promised us we'd one day enjoy flat-screen TVs, 3D printers, Roombas, smartwatches, and FaceTime. And at times, the never-ending arrival of new technology can make us feel like George on that treadmill walking Astro and screaming, "Jane, stop this crazy thing!" 1966. 2 words, Star Trek. Without a doubt, the original series did more to help define the idea of futuristic space travel and the potential of technological science than any other TV show. If this channel survives beyond episode 1, I promise I'll be talking more about Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, and Lieutenant Uhura in upcoming installments. But for now, let's boldly go explore some other years. 1968. Planet of the Apes and 2001 A Space Odyssey bring big budgets and critical legitimacy to movie science fiction. Though both films won unprecedented Oscars, when Charlton Heston, Moses himself, makes a movie about futuristic talking monkeys, you know the genre has arrived. 1974. Steve Austin, astronaut, a man barely alive. Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. We have the capability to make the world's first bionic man. Steve Austin will be that man. We can make him better than he was, better, stronger, faster. Sound familiar? Well, to junior high me, nothing was more riveting than watching bionic superheroes like Steve Austin and Jamie Summers battle fembots, Maskatron, and Bigfoot. Now that was great TV, and on the rare occasions now when I have to run or jump, I still make that noise from time to time. 1977. You probably think I'm going to say 2 words, Star Wars, but actually, since George Lucas told us that his space opera takes place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, it's technically not retrofuturism. That said, the success of the film cannot be ignored. If nothing else, it chummed the waters for the futuristic feeding frenzy that rebooted the dormant titles like Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, and The Twilight Zone. Okay, so for the sake of time, we're going to do a figurative David Lee Roth karate backflip off a drum riser and jump ahead to the early 80s when VCRs, cable TV, and movie channels ruled the world. In the early 80s, studios saw dollar signs in future-themed fare and pumped out sci-fi titles like never before. We all remember Aliens, Back to the Future, and The Terminator, but if you dig a little deeper and remember the fantastical futures rendered in other movies like Outland, Escape from New York, Brazil, and even that all-time classic The Ice Pirates, starring Bruce Vilanch and John Matuszak. On the small screen, the early 80s were a relatively barren time. The only memorable hit from that period that I recall was the miniseries. I guess all the great minds of sci-fi were hard at work creating Small Wonder, the sitcom about an android trying to pass as a 10-year-old girl. And get this, in its 4-year run, the production team of Small Wonder churned out a whopping 96 episodes. If you're not sure why this is so shocking, watch one episode of Small Wonder and explain why anyone made another, let alone 95 more. 1982. Ridley Scott manages to top his spectacular 1980 film Alien with Blade Runner, showing the full potential of the genre. The result of combining ingredients like Harrison Ford, a Philip K. Dick story, a Vangelis score, and some of the best production design in movie history. The movie is a visual masterpiece and holds its own against anything that we see today. That same year, the Disney company makes good on Walt's vision to create a planned city devoted to modern innovation. The experimental prototype community of tomorrow, better known as Epcot, opens in Orlando, Florida. It's ultimately more theme park than urban utopia, but the spirit of the founders' ideology can be seen in attractions like Spaceship Earth, Test Track, and Mission Space. 1987. The Star Trek movies were box office gold in the 80s, and with each hit, the salary demands of leading men William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy climb upward. Paramount, fearing shrinking profits, decides the remedy is to reboot the franchise on the small screen using lesser-known actors and smaller budgets. The result is Star Trek: The Next Generation, which turns out to be the most successful syndicated show of its era, producing 178 episodes and inspiring 2 spin-offs and 4 movies. The show depicts a fascinating future I can only dream to experience, as long as that future does not include cameos by Joe Piscopo, John Tesh, and Whoopi Goldberg. 1994. It's what I call the beginning of the end of the future. Up to this point, futurism was this distant, unreachable thing. For the average person, computers were for scientists, researchers, the pocket protector guys. But in 1994, we all first encountered the World Wide Web, and everything changed. It's easy to forget just how different the world was before British engineer Tim Berners-Lee unveiled the first web browser. Now, everyone had a reason to own a computer, and the intergalactic fiction of yesteryear didn't seem so far-fetched or far off. 1999. A pair of upstart filmmakers known as the Wachowskis arrived to deliver the fatal blow to the analog age with their majestic love letter to digital effects, The Matrix. Somehow, through their groundbreaking high-tech sorcery, they not only created bullet time, but also managed to transform Keanu Reeves from the dude who was outacted by a bus in Speed to a compelling film star. Well, as the purple prognosticator Prince predicted, 2000 party over, oops, out of time. For me, 1999 is officially the end of the analog age, and for this installment, the end of Retrostellar. If you consider yourself a product of the analog age or just a fan of it, I hope you'll come back next time as we remember yesterday's tomorrow's today on Retrostellar. Thank you so much for watching. Please take a second and click the subscribe button to see future videos. Go to overjupiter.com for the best sci-fi, superhero, and pop culture t-shirts on this or any planet. Use the code RETRO15 to save 15% store-wide. See you next time!